Marijuana guy.
So truth be told, I wasn't planning on making a prediction video because on paper, most of these fights, especially the middleweight ones, are very cut and dry. Alex Pereira should have no problems knocking out Sean Strickland. Sean will not be able to sit behind his 1-2 against such an advanced and powerful striker, and even if he shoots for a takedown at some point, Pereira has proven to have pretty good takedown defense. The same really goes for the main event between Cannonier and Izzy. Cannonier is insanely powerful, he has great composure and deceptively good timing, but he has a somewhat weak chin. He isn't fast at covering distance, which has been one of Izzy's few weaknesses throughout his career, and overall he's just very stationary. He doesn't move much. Izzy is gonna play it safe, he's gonna stay behind his straight shots, counter whenever Jared overextends or overcommits, which he will eventually do often out of frustration, and he's gonna use his footwork to get away from whatever Jared tries to throw at him. But moving on to what could be an interesting middleweight fight, we got the top 15 gatekeeper Brad Tavares taking on the South African warlord Dricus du Plessis. Now, Brad Tavares has been fighting in the UFC for a very long time. All things told, he's actually had a good career so far. A lot of his losses have come from future champions or top contenders. But it's these big setbacks that have pushed him to the back of the line and prevented him from breaking into title contention. Tavares is primarily a kickboxer and he likes to keep things very simple and by the book. He has a pretty good jab, a counter left hook, but his best weapon as of late is definitely the outside calf kick. He also has very good takedown defense, which might come into play in this fight. Where he really falls is in his boxing defense. On the back foot, he doesn't move his head that much. Instead, he keeps a high guard and tries to disengage, usually by backing up in a straight line, which has gotten him caught in the past by shots around the guard. On the offense, especially on his jab, he tends to keep his head very high, which leaves him susceptible to counters. Dricus, on the other hand, is much more well-rounded, but ever since his fights with Roberto Soldic, he's really leaned into his striking. He originally comes from a background of judo and wrestling, and he used it to great effect in his early career. He was also a professional kickboxer with 33 fights, 30 of which were stoppages. So Dricus also tends to favor kickboxing, but he does a few things different from Tavares. First of all, he's much more defensive and tends to look for single shots like leg kicks or punches from the outside. He tends to blitz when he goes into offense, but he rarely catches people in this manner. His knockouts usually come in the form of counter shots. He also spreads his base very wide and leaves his front leg far out there, which leaves him susceptible to leg kicks. Now, needless to say, all the danger in this fight will come from Dricus' side. He has tremendously powerful hands. One clean shot and Tavares will go out. He also has a very dangerous guillotine if he chooses to grapple, which I think would be a good idea. Even though Tavares has good takedown defense, if Dricus is able to lure him into a striking match and then shoot for a takedown later in the fight, he will definitely get it. He could potentially do it early in the fight too, because Tavares is going to come in looking for a kickboxing match. He's not going to be prepared for the wrestling. I think Tavares is going to have to be extremely patient and very defensively responsible, which he showed he is able to do in his last fight against the extremely aggressive Omari Akhmadov. He also has to use a lot of feints, calf kicks, maybe even body kicks whenever Dricus goes southpaw, and of course look to counter whenever Dricus blitzes in. He cannot just put his guard up and back up. Whatever the trajectory of the fight will look like though, I think Dricus will eventually catch Tavares at some point and put him out cold like his past opponents. Moving on to another middleweight bout, we have the aging gatekeeper Uriah Hall taking on the extremely dangerous grappling prospect in Andre Muniz. So I think everyone already has the gist of Uriah Hall's game. He's super athletic, very powerful and talented, but he cannot handle fast-paced, pressuring fighters. Once he starts getting touched up, he shells up and panics with big telegraphed strikes. But when the fight is at a moderate pace and he isn't getting overwhelmed with activity, he's a very dangerous fighter. He has a solid jab and he uses it a lot because of his near 80-inch reach. He does keep his head very high though when he throws it, which gets him countered very often. But he also has an excellent right straight, especially as a counter. And coming from a background of karate and kickboxing, he of course has a pretty good kicking game when he has space to work with. So as of late, he has completely strayed away from that and only sticks to boxing, calf kicks, and sometimes teeps or body kicks. And I think that's gonna have to be what he sticks to, because the last middleweight he wants to go to the ground with is Andre Muniz. Because you're talking about a guy who submitted Jacare Souza, took him down and broke his arm with an armbar. It was as clean as you can get. He also has the wrestling to back it up, with explosive double legs, good control and trips against the cage, and he's gonna have to really lean into his wrestling. Not just because it's the path of least resistance, as Uriah Hall has pretty bad takedown defense and he always leaves his back exposed when getting up, but mainly because Muniz is probably not going to be able to overwhelm Hall and push him backwards without getting countered hard. Muniz has some decent round kicks, which he swings at will to the legs, to the body, to the head, which works because he doesn't care about getting taken down, but he's very wild with his hands and tends to overextend a lot. Even so, Hall is a very slow starter, meaning he just doesn't get a good feel for his opponent's timing until 8 to 10 minutes into the fight. So for my official prediction, I gotta go with Andre Muniz by first round submission. I think he's gonna shoot for a double leg, drive him to the cage, and eventually Hall is gonna give up his back, which is when he takes it and chokes him out. Then we go to Brad Riddell taking on the 6'3" Jalin Turner. Besides the co-main event, this is the fight that most piques my interest. Not only because of the insane size discrepancy, but also because of how skilled these guys really are. Brad Riddell, as you guys know, is a teammate of Adesanya and Volkanovski. He's an elite striker with a wealth of knowledge in professional kickboxing against guys like Regin Ursel, who is a kickboxing champion at ONE FC, John Wayne Parr, who is a kickboxing legend. He even fought that asshole fake Shaolin guy Yi Long. Needless to say, when it comes to striking, he's a lot more technically sound than Turner. He likes to keep things very minimalistic but effective. He has a pretty good jab, excellent counter hooks, and a very underrated kicking game, although he mostly prefers to box with his opponents. Occasionally you'll see him go for more advanced techniques like shifting combos. I do think he will look to throw a lot of outside calf kicks in this fight, as Jalin has a naturally wide stance due to his leg length, and at times he's very heavy on his front foot. That being said, Riddell is by no means perfect. He has a tendency to telegraph and overswing. He also tends to get lured into brawls, which stems from his willingness to counter every time a strike is thrown at him. Rafael Fiziev was able to exploit this and made him pay many times during their fight. Jalin Turner, on the other hand, is much more well-rounded. He likes to keep things very basic. Being an absolute giant for the division, he likes his straight punches, but his hooks are also pretty powerful, and he throws everything very tight and on point. He never telegraphs or loads up on anything. Just like Riddell, Jalin doesn't kick much. Even when he does, he doesn't put a lot into them. It's just there to measure the distance or set up his punches. But what stands out the most about him is his composure. The guy has fucking ice in his veins. He's always calm, always focused. He never flinches or takes his eyes off his opponents. And this, combined with his great sense of distance and timing, makes for a very dangerous counter-striking game, which shouldn't come as a surprise, considering he spent his childhood trying to emulate Anderson Silva. Now the length and height is going to be a massive advantage for Turner, but what's not going to be is his tendency to linger in the pocket and trade. That can't and won't end well with someone like Brad Riddell. He has to stay in his own range and pick Brad apart with his long strikes. This won't be easy though, as Riddell is generally very defensively responsible. I believe Turner's path of least resistance on the feet would be to use a lot of feints and half-hearted jabs to bait out a response from Riddell and then counter him. Jalin also has a developing grappling game, which he might use at some point to spice things up, and I think he should, as Riddell doesn't have very good takedown defense, and as I said before, if you lure someone into a striking match, they won't be as prepared to defend the takedown. So with all that said, I think Brad Riddell will get it done via a decision. As big as the size discrepancy is, Brad Riddell has fought long and tall opponents in the past, and although the reach definitely gave him some trouble, especially with the jabs, he still managed to impose his game on them, and also he stayed much sharper. He wasn't overswinging or leaving many openings to be exploited. You can see this when he fought Jamie Mullarkey, you can see this when he fought Song Kenan, and also his kickboxing bouts with Regin Ursel, who has a nearly identical build to Turner. That said, this fight is going to be extremely competitive, and Jalin Turner's grappling could definitely prove to be a problem for Riddell. And at long last, the trilogy to settle the rivalry. This is not only going to be for the featherweight title, but I believe the winner of this fight determines the greatest featherweight of all time. Compare and contrast their resumes, you're going to see that Holloway and Volkanovski have already matched or completely surpassed all those accolades. Nevertheless, they fought for 15 minutes already, and between the two fights, they have adapted and adjusted tremendously towards each other. In their first fight, Holloway was not measuring the distance properly. He was consistently getting far into the pocket when he didn't need to, and this wound up getting him countered with big hooks. He was also extremely heavy on his lead leg and wasn't checking any of the leg kicks thrown at him. This eventually forced him into the southpaw stance, which made him even more susceptible to the left hook of Volkanovski, as he could now not only duck under, but take the outside foot and get a much better angle for the left hook. In their second fight, Holloway made numerous changes to his approach. He was much lighter on his lead leg, his stance was square so that he could not only check the kicks but land his own. He was also much more patient, looking to bait for countershots instead of attacking in combinations. He was measuring the range far better, not overcommitting and getting too close too often. Most importantly though, he had now timed Volkanovski's dip in close range exchanges, and found a home for his own uppercut, even dropping him at one point. Lastly, he was using more unorthodox techniques and really just allowing his creativity to flow. He was throwing back kicks to the body, to the head, and he was throwing same side combinations that caught Volkanovski completely off guard. On the other hand, Volkanovski had to make several adjustments mid-fight. First of all, he used a lot more feints, and he was a lot faster to close the distance, as he saw that Holloway was mainly looking for counter strikes, and because he could no longer rely on Holloway overextending and landing himself too close to begin with. Secondly, he had to switch to predominantly inside leg kicks, as Holloway had grown wise to checking and defending the outside ones. The inside leg kicks still worked to great effect though, and he was able to land them at will. He was also able to exploit Holloway's head movements, as he was often looking to slip to the outside of the jab. Volkanovski adjusted and started throwing a lot of lunging left hooks. And the final adjustment, from the third round and onward, he realized that he had to wrestle a lot more. Even though he didn't have a whole lot of success this route, it was ultimately enough to give him the edge in the judges' scorecards. This goes to show that this isn't just a battle of skill and will, but also mind. These guys are extremely evenly matched. They both have established weapons to use against one another. Holloway with his jab, his kicks and counter strikes. Volkanovski with his leg kicks, jab, left hooks and takedowns. The winner of this third fight will be the one who has made the most effective adjustments and addressed the weaknesses that his opponent exploited in their previous fights. For Holloway, he has to address those leg kicks. In their first fight, Volkanovski landed 75 leg kicks, which made up 47% of his total output. In the second fight, he landed 67 leg kicks, which made up 30% of his output. If Holloway can do something to deter him from throwing leg kicks, he's gonna cut out Volkanovski's strongest weapon from the equation. For Volkanovski, I think he should wrestle a lot more. In their rematch, he only really started wrestling in the 4th and 5th rounds. And also, he needs to find ways to land more damaging strikes. In their rematch, it was mostly Holloway who had the bigger moments, and it was because he was able to land cleaner and harder shots. Volkanovski can absolutely beat Holloway through just landing more strikes and being more active than him, but it's going to be much harder to go that route. With all that said though, I'm going to go with Volkanovski by a decision. Honestly though, I wouldn't be surprised if this one goes to a draw. So there are some other interesting fights on the card. We have the Battle of the Veterans, Donald Cerrone and Jim Miller. I think Donald Cerrone, even at his old and withered age, should be able to beat Miller. I mean, he has gotten thrashed in his last few fights, but look at the people he's fighting. Alex Morono, Anthony Pettis, Justin Gaethje, Conor McGregor. Meanwhile, Miller has been losing to Vink Pichel and Joe Solecki. Then there's Robbie Lawler versus Brian Barberena. I really want Robbie Lawler to win, but I can't help but imagine Lawler just shelling up and bobbing and weaving the entire fight, as Barberena just outworks him. Picking Lawler in this one, but that's entirely contingent upon him not doing what he's been doing in his last few fights. You also got Pedro Munoz versus Sean O'Malley. This fight is just going to come down to the question of, can O'Malley check or evade the leg kicks and defend the takedowns? If he can do both, he's going to absolutely destroy Munoz. But if he can only do one, then it becomes a far more even fight. Anyway, I cannot wait for this card. I know this video is really long. It's currently Wednesday and I gotta somehow edit it all together before Saturday. Thank you all for watching and always remember,
pull triggers, kill n***s. Bye.